The story of the Phoenician Sea Kings begins on a stretch of coastline that seems to shimmer between myth and memory. The narrow ribbon of land that once held their cities, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, lies between the restless Mediterranean and the rugged mountains of Lebanon. Even now, when the night air is still and salt drifts through the breeze, you can imagine the faint rhythm of waves against stone harbors, the soft creak of rope and wood, and the faraway call of sailors preparing their ships. This was the world of the Phoenicians, the world's first great navigators, whose sails carried not only goods and treasure, but ideas, alphabets, and stories across the sea. Their origins reach deep into the mists of time. The ancestors of the Phoenicians were Canaanites, part of an ancient Semitic people who lived along this fertile coast more than 5,000 years ago. In the dawn of recorded history, these coastal cities were already thriving, trading with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the islands of the Aegean. While inland empires rose and fell under the weight of war and ambition, the Phoenicians survived through something quieter: adaptability, diplomacy, and the sea itself. The land was too narrow to support great armies or vast fields of grain, but it was rich in cedar wood, skill, and courage. From this slender inheritance, they built a civilization that would touch every corner of the known world. By the second millennium BCE, the cities of the coast had taken on distinct personalities. Byblos, the northernmost, was a place of scribes and sacred texts, where papyrus from Egypt was imported and written upon with cuneiform and hieroglyphs. Sidon, to the south, was famed for its glass and craftsmanship, shimmering objects shaped from sand and fire. Tyre, rising from its island base, became the most powerful of them all, a fortress upon the sea, almost untouchable, whose twin harbors filled with ships from every land. Each of these cities shared a common language and heritage, yet each guarded its independence fiercely. There was no united Phoenician kingdom, no single ruler who called himself king of all. Instead, they were bound together by trade routes and tradition, a loose web of alliances that spread like ripples across the sea. When we speak of the Phoenicians, we speak of sailors and merchants, but that simple description does not capture the poetry of their lives. Imagine a young Tyrian shipwright standing at dawn, his hands calloused from shaping planks of cedar. He gazes toward the horizon, where the sea glows pale gold under the rising sun. He knows that beyond that line of light lie islands he has never seen, ports filled with unfamiliar tongues, and markets overflowing with treasures from lands he can only dream of. To the Phoenicians, the horizon was not a boundary, it was an invitation. The sea was not something to be feared, it was the great road of the world. Their ships were masterpieces of balance and design. The early Phoenician vessels were long and narrow, propelled by rows of oarsmen and a single square sail. Over time they refined these designs, creating the swift bireme and trireme, warships with double or triple rows of oars, and the sturdy merchant ships whose curved hulls could carry enormous cargoes. The cedar forests of Lebanon provided the wood that made these marvels possible. The scent of resin filled the air of their shipyards, mingling with tar and salt and the voices of men calling to one another across the decks. Each ship was both a tool and a symbol, a fragment of home that could ride the waves for months, even years, before returning. As the centuries drifted by, Phoenician ships began to appear in distant places. They reached Cyprus, Crete, and the islands of the Aegean. They traded with Egypt, bringing back gold, ivory, and spices. They sailed westward, establishing colonies and trading posts along the coasts of North Africa, Sicily, and Spain. It is said that they even ventured beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, into the open Atlantic. To the Greeks, they were almost mythical, a people of endless horizons, whose ships could appear suddenly on the morning tide, their purple sails gleaming like dawn. Ah yes, the purple. The color that defined their civilization and gave them their name. The word Phoenician comes from the Greek phoenix, meaning purple-red, and it refers to the rare dye they produced from a small sea snail called the murex. The process was laborious and unpleasant. Thousands of shells had to be crushed to extract a few drops of liquid, which turned a deep, radiant purple when exposed to sunlight. The dye was so precious that only royalty could afford garments made from it. Kings and emperors across the ancient world sought the famed Tyrian purple, and through it the Phoenicians became synonymous with wealth and luxury. But for the people who made it, it was simply one more trade good, one more link in the chain that connected them to distant lands. To live as a Phoenician was to live between the mountain and the sea, between danger and opportunity. Their coastline offered little in the way of flat farmland, and so they turned outward, letting the sea become their harvest. Olive oil, wine, cedarwood, glass, textiles, all flowed from their ports. In return, they brought home gold from Iberia, tin from Cornwall, and grain from Egypt. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They built no vast empire of soldiers and cities. Instead, they built an empire of exchange, one that depended on trust, skill, and reputation. When Phoenician traders arrived in a new port, they did not come with swords drawn. They came with gifts, with stories, and with goods no one else could provide. There was a quiet genius in this way of life. While empires like Assyria and Babylon expanded through conquest, exhausting themselves in endless wars, the Phoenicians expanded through understanding. They learned the languages of others, adopted their gods, and shared their own. In doing so, they became bridges between worlds, the translators of culture, the messengers of the Mediterranean. Their religion reflected this blending of worlds. They worshipped a pantheon of gods, many of them shared with the broader Canaanite tradition. Chief among them was Baal, the lord of the storm, whose thunder echoed the crash of waves, and Astarte, the goddess of fertility and the sea, whose image often adorned their ships. Temples crowned their cities, filled with incense, carved ivory, and offerings from the sea. Yet the Phoenicians were not zealots. Their faith traveled with them, adapting to new lands and names. In Carthage, the great colony that would later challenge Rome itself, Baal became Baal-Hamon, and Astarte was known as Tanit. Faith, like trade, was something they carried wherever they went. And always there was the sea. The sea that rocked them to sleep in the harbors of Tyre, that shimmered like glass under the midday sun, that darkened and hissed under winter storms. It was their constant companion, their test, their teacher. They learned its moods, its hidden currents, the way the stars could guide them when land was far away. The Phoenicians were among the first to use the North Star as a navigational guide, tracing invisible lines across the night sky. Their knowledge of wind and tide would become the foundation for later mariners, from the Greeks to the Romans to the explorers of the Renaissance. To drift through their world is to drift through the beating heart of the ancient Mediterranean. In their ports, languages mixed like colors in glass, Egyptian, Greek, Akkadian, Hittite, all meeting in the bustle of trade. The air was filled with the sound of hammers striking bronze, merchants calling prices, and the laughter of sailors home from long voyages. At night, the oil lamps flickered in the streets, and the scent of cedar smoke rose from the workshops. It was a world alive with connection, with motion, with the hum of exchange that never quite slept. And yet, even in all this movement, there was a kind of stillness, a philosophy of balance. The Phoenicians did not seek to dominate the sea, but to live in harmony with it. They understood that the waves could be both ally and enemy, that fortune and loss were twins that sailed side by side. Their ships, light yet strong, embodied this understanding. Flexible, resilient, always ready to bend but never break. As centuries flowed like tides, their influence spread outward, far beyond what any one generation could imagine. The alphabet they developed, a simple, elegant system of symbols representing sounds rather than words or syllables, would change the world. From this Phoenician script came the Greek alphabet, and from Greek came Latin, and from Latin, nearly every modern alphabet of the Western world. In this quiet way, through ink and trade rather than conquest, they left one of the most profound legacies in human history. When you imagine a Phoenician ship sailing across the calm evening sea, think of all that it carried: the scent of cedar, the glimmer of glass, the gleam of bronze and purple cloth. But also think of the invisible cargo, the ideas, the languages, the patterns of thought, that traveled with those merchants and sailors. Each voyage was a thread in the great web of human connection, woven across centuries and continents. And as we drift gently toward the close of this chapter, imagine yourself standing at the harbor of Tyre as the sun sets behind the hills. The waves murmur softly against the breakwater. The masts of ships sway like reeds against the glowing sky. Somewhere, a sailor hums a low song, a melody passed down from fathers to sons, from ship to ship, from century to century. The air is warm, the sea endless, and the horizon seems to call your name. The story of the Phoenicians is only beginning. Ahead lie greater voyages, new cities, and challenges that will test the strength of their world. But for now, let the sound of the sea guide your breathing. Let the memory of their sails drift across your thoughts. For in the hush between waves, in the deep rhythm of the tides, the spirit of the Phoenician Sea Kings still whispers, calm, enduring, and eternal. The sea for the Phoenicians was both a promise and a path. By the time their ships became familiar sights across the Mediterranean, their world had expanded far beyond the narrow strip of homeland between the mountains and the shore. They were no longer simply coastal traders, but true mariners, sailors who knew the language of every wind, who could read the surface of the water like a map written by the gods. From their harbors in Tyre and Sidon, they ventured outward, guided by stars, instinct, and memory, building an invisible empire of trade routes that bound together a world divided by language and war. When we think of empire, we imagine walls and soldiers, banners and battles. But the Phoenician Empire was something else entirely. It was a web of relationships, a rhythm of journeys. Each voyage began with a promise, to bring back something of value, to return safely to the family who waited on the shore. The merchants of Tyre did not conquer cities, they befriended them. Their ships entered ports bearing olive oil, cedar, wine, and purple cloth, and in exchange they took on metals, grain, spices, and ideas. They were, in a sense, ambassadors of the sea, messengers carrying the scent of distant lands back to their own. It is in this age, between the 10th and the 8th centuries BCE, that the Phoenicians begin to leave their greatest mark on history. Their voyages reached the farthest edges of the known world. They established settlements, small at first, then thriving communities, on the coasts of Cyprus, Sicily, Sardinia, North Africa, and Spain. These were not colonies in the modern sense, not outposts of conquest or subjugation, but partnerships with the land and its people. Each one was a reflection of home, a fragment of the coast of Lebanon carried westward by the tides. The earliest of these was likely Utica, founded on the shores of what is now Tunisia. From there, other settlements followed. Hippo, Hadramedum, Lixus, Malacca, and most famously Carthage. Carthage, legend tells us, was founded by exiles from Tyre under the leadership of a queen named Elissa, whom the Romans would later call Dido. Whether she truly lived or not, her story captures the spirit of her people, restless, resilient, drawn ever toward the horizon. According to the tale, she fled her homeland after her brother murdered her husband, and, gathering her followers, sailed westward until she reached the North African coast. There, she struck a clever bargain with the local ruler, agreeing to buy as much land as could be covered by an ox hide. Then she cut the hide into thin strips, stretching it into a vast circle, and within that circle she built Carthage, the shining jewel of the Western Sea. Carthage would grow to overshadow its mother city, Tyre, becoming one of the greatest powers of the ancient world. But in this early period, it was simply one of many Phoenician way stations, a harbor of safety and rest for sailors who had crossed the treacherous western waters. It is difficult to imagine, in our modern sense of geography, how vast these voyages seemed. A journey from Tyre to Spain could take weeks, even months, depending on wind and current. Each night, ships would anchor in sheltered coves, their crews lighting small fires on the beach, the smoke drifting upward into the star-strewn dark. These were moments of stillness in a life defined by motion. To the Phoenicians, every coastline had its personality, every island its voice. They learned to recognize the scent of a place long before they saw its shore, the resin of pine from the Aegean, the spice of African sand, the sweetness of Iberian air after rain. They did not fear the unknown, they courted it. Their maps were not drawn on parchment but remembered in rhythm, the number of days between ports, the color of the water near each cape, the shape of stars rising above the horizon. It was navigation as art, and it bound them more deeply to the world than any written chart ever could. One of their most important goals was the search for metals, especially tin and silver. The Bronze Age had taught the ancient world the value of combining copper and tin to create bronze, and both were scarce. The Phoenicians discovered vast silver deposits in southern Spain, particularly around the region later called Tartessos, a land half legendary to their contemporaries. The wealth of Tartessos glittered through ancient stories, and the Phoenicians were among the first outsiders to trade there. In exchange for precious metal, they brought fine goods: pottery, glass, ivory, and textiles dyed in that famous purple hue. Their presence transformed the Iberian coast into a vibrant network of trade, connecting the Atlantic world to the heart of the Mediterranean. As their trade routes grew, so did their influence. The Greeks began to imitate their ship designs, their writing system, even their craftsmanship. The alphabet, that elegant series of 22 symbols, began to travel with the Phoenician merchants wherever they went. It was simple enough to be taught quickly, practical enough to be adopted by others, and flexible enough to capture new languages. When Greek sailors encountered it, they adapted it to their own speech, adding vowels, creating something that would, in time, become the ancestor of nearly every alphabet used in the Western world. Few gifts in human history have been so quietly transformative. At home, the cities of the Phoenicians flourished. Tyre remained the jewel of the coast, its twin harbors bustling with ships from every land. Sidon continued to produce fine glass, delicate and luminous, prized across the Mediterranean. Byblos remained a center of writing and religion, its ancient temples still echoing with prayers to Baal and Astarte. The wealth that flowed into these cities was extraordinary. Caravans brought spices and gold from Arabia. Egyptian merchants arrived bearing papyrus and grain. Greek traders came in search of cedar and dye. The markets of Tyre were said to glitter with bronze, ivory, and jewels. Yet the true treasure of the Phoenicians was not gold, it was connection. Their society was layered but mobile. At the top were the wealthy merchant families, who financed expeditions and owned fleets of ships. Below them were craftsmen, sailors, and laborers, men who built and manned the vessels, who hauled cargoes and shaped glass, who endured long months at sea. There were also slaves, many of them captured or bought in foreign lands, who worked in the dye pits or the shipyards. But among all these classes, there was a shared identity, a sense of belonging to something greater than the walls of one city. To be Phoenician was to be part of a seafaring people, citizens of the water rather than the land. Religion remained the pulse of their culture. The gods of Tyre and Sidon were carried westward, their images placed in new temples across the sea. Baal Melkart, a solar and sea deity, was especially beloved in Tyre. He symbolized strength, renewal, and mastery of the waters. Every year, his festival celebrated the cycle of death and rebirth, a ritual reflecting both the rhythm of nature and the voyage of the sailor, departing, vanishing, and returning home. In Carthage, Melkart would later merge with the Punic god Baal Hammon, and Astarte would become Tanit, goddess of fertility and the moon. Thus their faith evolved, adapting like their people, taking root in new soil without losing its essence. Archaeologists have found traces of these sacred spaces: altars carved from limestone, small bronze figurines of gods and goddesses, incense burners shaped like ships. It is easy to imagine how these temples might have looked by firelight, the smoke curling into the dark, the scent of resin and oil rising into the sky, the distant murmur of the sea beyond the city walls. Worship, for the Phoenicians, was never separate from the elements that sustained them. The sea was a living presence, a divine force to be respected and understood. And yet, their world was not without danger. Storms could rise suddenly, tearing sails and scattering fleets. Pirates haunted the open water, preying on merchant ships heavy with goods. Inland powers, jealous of their wealth, sought to dominate the coast. The Assyrians in particular cast a long shadow. From their great cities on the Tigris, they expanded westward, demanding tribute from every kingdom they encountered. The Phoenician cities, too small to resist militarily, used their gifts of diplomacy to survive. They sent ambassadors bearing gold, ships, and fine cloth, and for a time this appeased the empire. But the tribute grew heavier, and Tyre especially began to chafe under foreign demands. The sea remained their refuge. Even as armies marched across the Near East, the Phoenicians slipped away upon the water, carrying their trade and their culture far beyond the reach of any conqueror. This was their true genius, to bend without breaking, to endure through movement rather than confrontation. They were like water itself, yielding yet impossible to crush. As the night deepens and the world of the Phoenicians expands in your mind, imagine a quiet moment on one of their ships. The deck rocks gently beneath your feet. The horizon glows faintly under the moon. The oars have been drawn in, and the sail flutters softly in the wind. The sailors move silently, their faces calm, their eyes fixed on the constellations above. The stars are old friends to them, guides through the endless blue. The faint sound of the sea against the hull is like a heartbeat, slow and eternal. In this stillness, you can almost hear the whisper of a distant coast, the promise of land unseen. The Phoenicians lived for that promise. Each voyage was an act of faith, not only in their ships and skills, but in the sea itself, in the idea that beyond every horizon lay another home waiting to be found. Their courage was quiet, steady, like the tide that never ceases to return. As we close this chapter, let the rhythm of their journeys echo softly in your thoughts. The world they built was not made of stone or empire, but of routes, memories, and shared dreams. The Phoenician Sea Kings sailed into history not through conquest, but through connection. And in the hush of the sea, in the slow turning of the stars above their ships, they found something eternal, a peace born of purpose, a harmony between wind, water, and the human heart. Rest for a moment with that thought. The waves rise and fall like breath, calm and endless. The horizon waits, quiet and silver under the moon. And the story of the Phoenician sailors drifts onward, timeless and serene, into the next chapter of the sea. The sea has a way of remembering. Long after the sails of the Phoenicians faded from the horizon, the echoes of their journeys remained in the harbors they touched, in the alphabets they shared, and in the stories carried by those who met them. But there was a time when their presence was not yet memory, when the entire Mediterranean pulsed with the rhythm of their ships, and their purple banners fluttered like waves of dawn across the coasts of 3 continents. This was the height of the Phoenician age, when their influence stretched from the Levant to the Atlantic, and when their quiet empire of trade reached its fullest bloom. In the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, Tyre stood at the peak of its power. Its twin harbors were crowded with ships, its markets alive with the murmur of a dozen languages. The city itself seemed to rise out of the sea, built upon an island fortress surrounded by strong walls. To approach Tyre was to see a mirage of wealth, granaries filled with Egyptian grain, warehouses stacked with goods from every corner of the known world, and temples gleaming with ivory and gold. At its heart stood the great temple of Melkart, the city's patron deity, whose eternal flame burned to symbolize the spirit of Tyre itself. The people of Tyre were proud, but their pride was tempered by the sea's lessons. They knew that fortune could change as swiftly as the wind. Each morning, merchants gathered in the harbor to watch the departing ships, their eyes tracking the sails until they became small white flecks against the horizon. Each evening, those same merchants would climb the city walls to look eastward, toward the faint glow of the mountains, wondering if their ships were safe. Trade was their lifeblood but also their greatest risk. Storms, pirates, or political upheaval could erase fortunes overnight. Still they sailed, for the call of the sea was stronger than fear. As Tyre flourished, so too did its colonies. Carthage grew rapidly, its harbor filling with merchants from across the western Mediterranean. The city was designed with remarkable precision. A double harbor, one for merchants and another for warships, both protected by circular walls and guarded entrances. At the center of the military harbor stood an island with ship sheds and an observation tower, allowing watchmen to see every vessel at once. This ingenious design reflected the Phoenician mastery of the sea, their understanding that trade and defense were 2 sides of the same coin. In the workshops of Carthage, craftsmen shaped gold and silver into delicate ornaments, carved ivory into smooth figurines, and blew molten glass into forms of astonishing beauty. The markets were filled with color: saffron from Cyrenaica, amber from the Baltic, tin from Britain, and coral from Sardinia. Languages blended like perfumes in the air, each adding to the chorus of the city. The Carthaginians inherited the skill and ambition of their Tyrian ancestors, but they would soon develop a distinct identity of their own, an identity forged not only through trade, but through the trials of survival in a world of empires. The Assyrian kings, ever hungry for tribute, continued to cast their gaze toward the Phoenician coast. Under Tiglath-Pileser III and his successors, the Assyrian army swept westward, demanding submission from every city-state in their path. The Phoenicians, pragmatic as always, met these demands with gifts and diplomacy. Sidon and Byblos bowed quickly, sending tribute of gold, cedar, and ships. Tyre, however, resisted. Its island fortress gave it confidence. No army could reach its walls without crossing the sea. For years the Assyrians laid siege to Tyre, but the city endured. Its people relied on their fleets for supplies, defying the empire through patience and perseverance. This defiance became legend. To the world beyond, Tyre seemed indestructible, a city blessed by Melkart and protected by the sea itself. Even when Assyria claimed victory, it was only nominal. Tyre continued to trade, to prosper, to expand its colonies. The Assyrian conquest of the land could not extinguish the spirit of the water. During this time, the Phoenicians continued to push the boundaries of exploration. Ancient writers later claimed that they sailed around the entire continent of Africa, a journey sponsored by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II in the late 7th century BCE. The story tells of ships departing from the Red Sea, sailing south along the African coast, and eventually returning through the Pillars of Hercules to the Mediterranean, a voyage that would have taken nearly 3 years. The sailors reported that at one point the sun rose to their right, meaning they had crossed the equator and seen the southern skies. To modern historians, this detail lends the tale remarkable credibility. If true, it was one of the greatest navigational feats in the ancient world, and a testament to the unmatched daring of Phoenician mariners. Even closer to home, their voyages carried them deep into mythic territory. They explored the western Mediterranean long before the Greeks began to colonize it. They established trading posts on the Balearic Islands and along the southern coast of France. In Sardinia, they mined metals and built settlements that later became centers of Punic influence. On the Atlantic coast of Spain they founded Gadir, known today as Cadiz, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe. From there, they ventured northward, trading with the peoples of the Iberian Peninsula and perhaps even reaching the misty Isles of Britain, drawn by the promise of tin. It is humbling to think of those small wooden ships braving the open ocean. The Phoenicians had no compass, no sextant, no charts in the modern sense. They navigated by stars, by currents, by the color of the water and the flight of birds. They read the sea as one might read the lines of a familiar face. Their courage was born of knowledge, the quiet confidence of those who understand their element completely. At home their culture continued to evolve. The Phoenicians were great borrowers and innovators, absorbing influences from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean, and blending them into something distinctly their own. Their art reflected this synthesis. Ivory carvings showing Egyptian motifs, jewelry bearing Mesopotamian patterns, pottery echoing Greek forms. Yet beneath these layers ran the unmistakable current of Phoenician style, elegant, balanced, deeply connected to nature and the sea. Their language, written in that simple yet revolutionary alphabet, became the lingua franca of trade across the Mediterranean. Merchants from distant lands used it to record transactions, mark ownership, and exchange correspondence. In this way, even those who never saw the Phoenician homeland carried a piece of its culture with them. The alphabet was the invisible sail that spread their legacy farther than any ship could reach. As their fame grew, so too did their myths. To the Greeks, the Phoenicians were mysterious and wise, a people of enchantment. The story of Europa, the maiden carried away by Zeus in the form of a bull, begins in Phoenicia. She was said to be the daughter of the king of Tyre, her abduction symbolizing the transfer of civilization from east to west. The Greeks also credited the Phoenicians with introducing writing and navigation, gifts that shaped their own golden age. In myth as in trade, the Phoenicians bridged worlds. But even as they thrived, shadows gathered. The great powers of the Near East, Assyria, Babylon, and later Persia, viewed the Phoenician cities as both valuable and vulnerable. Their wealth made them targets, their independence a challenge. When Babylon rose under Nebuchadnezzar II, Tyre once again found itself under siege. This time the struggle lasted 13 long years. The city held out as it had before, but at great cost. Its defenses were nearly broken, its people weary. Eventually, Tyre submitted, though not in defeat. It negotiated favorable terms, preserving much of its autonomy. Still, the balance of power had shifted. The age of the independent sea kings was waning. Yet even under foreign rule, the Phoenicians continued to sail. Their ships served Babylon and later Persia, as part of imperial fleets. When the Persians rose to dominate the ancient world, they recognized the unmatched skill of Phoenician mariners. Phoenician shipbuilders constructed vessels for the Persian navy. Their sailors commanded squadrons that fought in great battles against the Greeks. Even in the service of others, they remained masters of the sea. Carthage, far from the reach of Eastern empires, began to assume the mantle of leadership among the Phoenician cities. Its location gave it control over key routes between the eastern and western Mediterranean, and its navy grew powerful enough to challenge both Greek and later Roman expansion. The Carthaginians inherited not only the skills of their ancestors but also their adaptability, their talent for diplomacy, and their deep respect for the sea. The heart of Phoenician civilization beat in rhythm with the tide. Their legacy was not a single monument or conquest, but 1,000 quiet connections woven through time. Wherever they went, they left behind fragments of themselves, names, words, ideas, ways of seeing the world. Their understanding of navigation, trade, and craftsmanship became the foundation upon which later civilizations would build. As you listen, imagine standing at the edge of a Carthaginian quay as night falls. The ships are moored, their masts rising like a forest against the sky. The harbor water glows faintly, reflecting the lamps that line the docks. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays a slow, haunting melody. The air smells of salt, cedar, and smoke. You can feel the presence of generations who lived and dreamed by the sea, their voices soft but enduring, carried on the wind. The world of the Phoenicians was never static. It was a living current, flowing from east to west, from memory to myth. As the great powers of the land clashed and faded, the sailors of Tyre and Sidon continued to move with quiet purpose, their sails glowing pale in the moonlight. They belonged to no empire but the sea. Let that image drift across your mind. A lone ship gliding through calm waters, guided by the stars, carrying not armies but knowledge. It is the essence of the Phoenician spirit, the belief that to journey is to live, to connect is to endure. And as we leave this chapter behind, you can feel that same calm persistence within yourself. The waves roll on, the horizon stretches wide, and the sea, eternal and serene, carries the memory of those who once sailed beyond it. As we drift through the fourth chapter of our journey, the sun has already risen and set countless times over the waters that once carried Phoenician sails. The tide now brings us to a new moment in their story, a moment when the sea kings of the Purple Coast stood at the height of their power, their ships gliding from one horizon to another, their traders and settlers building quiet dominions across the known world. The Mediterranean, once a vast and unpredictable expanse, now hums softly with their rhythm. It is the sound of commerce, of craftsmanship, of languages blending like colors in twilight. The Phoenicians are no longer just coastal merchants, they are architects of a maritime world. Along the shores of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, the harbors gleam with life. Massive cedar beams, cut from the mountains of Lebanon, line the docks. Their scent hangs heavy in the air, sweet, resinous, and ancient. Shipwrights move among the timbers, bending, carving, and binding. The hulls of ships take shape like the curved ribs of sea creatures. Bronze tools tap softly against wood, echoing across the water in rhythmic patterns. The Phoenicians have perfected their ships to a level unmatched by any other people of the time. Long, narrow galleys with forward-pointing prows, swift as the wind and steady as stone. Their sails, dyed deep purple, shimmer like twilight clouds when the sun touches them. This was the golden age of Phoenician seafaring, an age not of conquest by sword but by sail. Their routes extend from the ports of Canaan to the far reaches of the Western Sea. Each voyage is both a trade mission and a thread in a growing web of connection. From Egypt they carry papyrus and gold, from Cyprus copper, from Greece fine pottery and olive oil, and from their own workshops come glass, timber, and the prized Tyrian purple dye. It is a color that marks kings and emperors, yet its origin lies in something so humble, a small shellfish, the murex snail, drawn from the rocky coasts. In the dye workshops of Tyre, the process is almost sacred. Workers crack open thousands of shells, each yielding a single drop of milky liquid. The air fills with a pungent, briny scent as the liquid oxidizes to a deep violet. It stains the fingers of those who handle it, the mark of the industry that built empires. The dye is traded for silver and grain, for gemstones and spices, for the favor of distant rulers. The Phoenicians themselves often wear modest linen, but their merchants and craftsmen move with quiet confidence, aware that they deal in a luxury that even pharaohs covet. Farther west, beyond the familiar coasts, Phoenician sailors establish colonies, small strategic outposts that serve as resting points and trade stations. Among them one will grow into legend, Carthage. Founded, according to tradition, by settlers from Tyre, Carthage begins as a simple port, but its position is perfect, sheltered, central, and close to rich lands. Here the Phoenician spirit takes root in foreign soil. The settlers bring with them their gods, their language, their craftsmanship. They build temples to Baal and Tanit, the great deities of their homeland. Smoke from altars drifts into the soft Mediterranean breeze, mingling with the scent of olive trees and salt. Life in Carthage follows the rhythms of the sea. Ships arrive from every direction, their decks stacked with goods, pottery, tin, amber, ivory. The city grows rapidly, its streets lined with limestone houses, its walls rising for protection. The harbor, with its inner and outer basins, becomes an engineering marvel. Docks radiate from a central island like spokes from a wheel. Workshops line the quays, where artisans craft amphorae, tools, and ornaments. Everything is built with quiet precision. The Phoenicians are never wasteful. They measure, plan, and adapt. Each new settlement reflects centuries of experience. Trade networks now stretch like invisible veins through the sea. In Sardinia, Malta, and the Balearic Islands, small Phoenician enclaves mirror the pattern. They are self-sufficient yet always tied to the mother cities. Each colony sends tribute back east in gold and goods, but more importantly in loyalty. Over time, these settlements develop their own identities. A unique blend of local and Phoenician customs emerges, producing hybrid art styles, languages, and rituals. In this quiet way, without armies or invasions, the Phoenicians spread a cultural tide that reshapes the Mediterranean world. Their sailors speak of places far beyond the known world, lands where the sun sets late and the sea grows wild. There are rumors of voyages beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the great straits that guard the edge of the known sea. Some tales tell of Phoenician ships reaching as far as Britain, trading for tin in the misty isles. Others whisper of routes that loop around Africa. Whether myth or memory, these stories reveal a people unafraid of distance. For them, the horizon is not a boundary but an invitation. The Phoenician mariners navigate not by stars alone but by memory. They know the smell of each current, the sound of waves breaking against distant shores, the color of the sky before a storm. They move through the world as if through a familiar house, every route mapped in the mind, every port a chapter in an ever-growing book. The sea is both their road and their refuge. It carries them home and takes them away again. Back in the homeland, the cities prosper. Temples rise higher, decorated with carved stone and bronze. The great temple of Melkart in Tyre, the city's guardian god, gleams with gilded columns. The priests tend the sacred fires while merchants bring offerings from afar. The economy flourishes, but so too does the intellectual life. The Phoenicians are not philosophers in the Greek sense, but their practical knowledge is vast. They understand geometry for shipbuilding, astronomy for navigation, chemistry for dye-making. Their wisdom is in their hands and eyes, not in scrolls. Yet from this very pragmatism emerges one of their most profound gifts to humanity: writing. The Phoenician alphabet, simple, efficient, adaptable, spreads with their trade. It contains only consonants, easy to learn, easy to modify. Other peoples adopt it, reshape it, and carry it forward. From this script, Greek and Latin will one day be born. Few legacies are more enduring, yet it arises quietly as all Phoenician things do from the needs of daily life. In their cities, one might hear the murmur of scribes tallying goods, the scratch of styluses on clay, the calls of merchants bartering over prices. Children learn the letters from their parents, tracing them into sand or wax. The language of trade becomes the language of the world. As centuries pass, their prosperity draws attention and envy. Powerful neighbors begin to watch the purple coast with covetous eyes. Egypt, Assyria, and later Babylon, all seek control of the region's wealth. Yet the Phoenicians endure, their strength lying not in armies but in adaptability. When empires rise, they trade. When empires fall, they trade still. Their loyalty is to the sea, not to kings. This fluid identity allows them to survive where others perish. In quiet moments, standing on the deck of a ship at dusk, a Phoenician captain might gaze across the horizon and see the glow of distant shores, Egypt's delta, the Greek Isles, perhaps even the faint shadow of Carthage far to the west. Each glow is a connection, a living thread in the great tapestry they have woven. He feels the wind in his hair, the pulse of the ship beneath his feet, and knows that this, the motion, the exchange, the endless rhythm, is the essence of his people. And as the stars emerge, guiding him home, the waves whisper softly against the hull. They speak of journeys yet to come, of lands yet to be found, of the quiet empires that leave no monuments of stone but live forever in the currents of history. As we drift toward rest, let the sound of those waters carry us deeper into the story, where empires of trade and tide shape the destiny of the world, and where, beneath the shimmering night sky, the Phoenician Sea Kings continue to sail beyond every horizon. The waves of history begin to shift once more, gentle at first, then gathering strength. The Phoenicians, masters of trade and tide, now find themselves navigating not only the seas but the tempests of empire. The centuries that follow their golden age are neither still nor silent. They are filled with the echoes of distant conquests, the hum of changing power, and the quiet resilience of a people who have made adaptation their art. The Purple Coast, once untouchable in its wealth and influence, becomes the meeting place of empires, each seeking control of the trade routes that bind the ancient world together. As dawn breaks over Tyre, the harbor glows with golden light. Ships still move in and out, their sails reflecting the morning sun. Merchants still shout prices in many languages. Fishermen still haul nets heavy with the catch of the night. Yet beneath this familiar rhythm lies unease. To the east, the great Assyrian Empire expands like a shadow. From Nineveh and Ashur come emissaries demanding tribute. Their demands are clear, their armies vast. For the first time in generations, the Phoenician cities must negotiate not with traders but with conquerors. They respond as they always have, with diplomacy. Tribute is sent. Silver, cedar, purple cloth, and artisans skilled enough to adorn Assyrian palaces. The great reliefs of Nineveh, depicting ships, trees, and strange animals, bear traces of Phoenician craftsmanship. The empire takes from them not only wealth but knowledge. Yet through these uneasy alliances the cities survive. When rebellion stirs in other lands, the Phoenicians quietly calculate, measuring each tide of danger as carefully as they once measured the winds. By the 7th century BCE, the balance begins to strain. Tyre resists Assyrian control, defying the tribute system. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser V lays siege to the city, followed by his successor Sargon II. For years the walls of Tyre hold firm, protected by the sea. The Assyrians, masters of land, cannot conquer what floats beyond their reach. In the end, they accept Tyre's continued existence in exchange for loyalty, a compromise born of respect. But the message is clear: the age of free seafaring independence is waning. Sidon, once a rival to Tyre, fares worse. When it rebels against Assyrian rule, its walls are torn down, its people enslaved. The Sea Kings begin to feel the cost of their geography, forever prosperous, yet forever exposed. They have built their lives upon the narrowest of spaces, mountains at their backs, empires at their gates, and the endless sea before them. Still the spirit of trade persists. Even under foreign rule, the Phoenicians continue to build ships for their conquerors, to navigate their routes, to enrich their markets. Their skills are indispensable and so they remain. When the Babylonians rise to replace the Assyrians, the story repeats. Tribute is demanded, resistance flares, and again Tyre endures a long and punishing siege. Nebuchadnezzar II, the Babylonian king, blockades the city for 13 years. But the island's citadel holds out, supplied secretly by sea. When the siege finally ends, Tyre survives, diminished yet unbroken. In these centuries of shifting power, Carthage grows ever stronger. The western colonies, once dependent on their mother cities, now thrive on their own. Carthage becomes a great city, vast, wealthy, and disciplined. Its navy patrols the western Mediterranean, guarding routes from Sicily to the Atlantic. The Carthaginians, descendants of Phoenician settlers, carry forward the traditions of navigation, trade, and diplomacy. Yet with distance comes difference. Carthage no longer looks east for guidance. It becomes the center of a new world with its own gods, its own ambitions. In Carthage's harbor, the air is filled with the scent of olive oil, the tang of salted fish, and the metallic gleam of bronze. Dockworkers move with practiced ease, stacking amphorae, tightening ropes, repairing sails. The inner harbor, shaped like a perfect circle, glows under the midday sun. At its center stands the Admiral's Island, ringed with ship sheds. It is an engineering marvel, equal parts beauty and precision. Here the legacy of Tyre lives on, reimagined for a new age. The Carthaginians maintain contact with the homeland, sending gifts to the temples of Baal and Melkart. Yet they also chart their own course. Their merchants reach beyond familiar coasts, to Spain for silver and tin, to North Africa for gold and ivory, to the distant isles for amber. Some tales even speak of a great explorer named Hanno, who sailed south along the African coast, founding settlements and recording wonders. Rivers of fire, flocks of strange birds, and people with skin the color of dusk. Whether literal or legendary, these stories capture the essence of the Phoenician spirit, a yearning to see what lies beyond. But as Carthage rises, the old cities of the east grow weary. The Persian Empire, vast and disciplined, sweeps across the Near East. Cyrus the Great, then Darius, bring Phoenicia into their realm, but unlike earlier conquerors they recognize its value. Under Persian rule, the Phoenician cities prosper again. Their ships join Persian fleets, their sailors guide expeditions. When Darius attempts to explore the Indus River, Phoenician mariners command his vessels. When Persia wages war against Greece, it is Tyrian and Sidonian ships that lead the charge. For a time, their partnership with Persia brings security. The Purple Coast thrives once more, its harbors busy, its craftsmen employed, its merchants trading across 3 continents. But this stability is bound to the fortunes of empire, and empires change like the tides. When Alexander of Macedon begins his legendary campaign, Phoenicia stands once more at a crossroads. As Alexander moves through the Levant, city after city opens its gates. Sidon submits peacefully, spared from destruction. But Tyre, proud and defiant, refuses. It is a decision born of dignity, and perhaps exhaustion. The island city believes its walls and sea will protect it as they always have. Yet Alexander is not deterred. He orders a causeway built from the mainland to the island, stone by stone, across the shallow waters. For months, his armies labor under the burning sun. The sea fills with debris and the noise of construction. When the causeway nears completion, the siege becomes one of legend. Tyrian ships fight desperately, setting fire to enemy engines, ramming Greek vessels with desperate strength. The city resists for 7 long months. But at last the walls fall. Alexander enters Tyre, furious yet awed by its resilience. The city is destroyed, its people slain or sold into slavery, but its spirit endures. Even in ruin, Tyre's name will echo for centuries, a symbol of endurance, of maritime genius, and of the human will to survive. As the smoke clears and the waves lap quietly against the stones, the story of the Phoenician homeland reaches its twilight. Yet this is not an ending. The legacy has already scattered like seeds across the world. In Carthage, in the alphabets of Greece, in the glass of distant workshops, in the myths of every coast they touched. The Sea Kings may no longer rule the waves, but their presence remains in every harbor, every sail, every letter written on parchment. Carthage now stands as the heir to their tradition. In the centuries to come, it will rise to challenge Rome itself. The Punic Wars will carry the last echo of the Phoenician world into the age of the republics. Even as armies clash and empires fall, the quiet brilliance of the Phoenicians endures, in craftsmanship, in curiosity, in the unyielding belief that knowledge and trade can bind the world more tightly than conquest ever could. And so, as we drift further into the night, imagine the sea once more, vast, eternal, and glimmering beneath a canopy of stars. Somewhere, a Phoenician ship still sails across that darkness. The oars dip rhythmically, the mast creaks softly, and the wind hums through the ropes like an ancient song. The helmsman looks ahead, his eyes fixed on a distant point of light, guiding him through waters unknown. In that moment, time dissolves. The centuries between then and now fade into quietness. The ship becomes a dream, floating gently between worlds. Its crew, long vanished, still whisper their language to the waves. Their spirit is the spirit of all who seek, all who build, all who believe that the horizon is never the end. Let the sound of those waves lull you now as history itself drifts into sleep. The Sea Kings have journeyed far, and so have we. The waters are calm, the stars steady. Rest within their memory as we prepare to follow the last tide, the tide that carries their legacy beyond time, into the stillness of remembrance. The waves quiet now. The sails have been lowered. The oars rest against the sides of the ship, their wooden handles cool beneath the starlight. The long story of the Phoenician Sea Kings drifts toward its end, not with a crash or a cry, but with a sigh that belongs to the ocean itself. Their journey, stretching across 1,000 years and 1,000 shores, has become part of the rhythm of the world. Though their cities have crumbled, though their names fade from the maps of empires, the traces of their presence remain, subtle, enduring, eternal. In the centuries after Tyre's fall, Carthage stands as their final beacon. The city's strength grows immense, its fleets countless. Its merchants dominate the western sea, its generals command armies, its diplomats weave alliances. To the Romans, Carthage becomes both rival and reflection, another people of builders and traders, disciplined, far-seeing, and proud. When they speak of the Carthaginians, they call them Punici, a word descended from Phoenikoi, the name the Greeks once gave to the sea kings of old. The line between Phoenician and Carthaginian blurs, for in truth the same blood, the same crafts, the same love of the sea flows through them both. For a time, Carthage seems eternal. Its harbors glitter with activity, its temples rise toward the sun, its navy rules the western Mediterranean. But the sea that once gave life can also carry ruin. As Rome expands, the waves between them become contested space. The Punic Wars stretch across generations, fierce, relentless, and tragic. When Carthage finally falls beneath the Roman legions, flames rise high into the night sky. The salt of the sea mingles with the salt Rome is said to sow into the earth, a symbolic end to a civilization born from salt water itself. And yet, nothing in history truly ends. Beneath Rome's triumph, the Phoenician spirit flows quietly onward. The Romans adopt their ship designs, their harbor architecture, their trade routes. The alphabet that once carried Phoenician words now shapes Latin, Greek, and all the languages that will follow. Their gods transform but do not disappear. Melkart becomes Heracles, Tanit merges with Juno, Baal echoes faintly in the thunderous deities of later myths. The Phoenicians vanish in name, but their essence dissolves into the cultures that surround them, like dye into the sea. Impossible to separate, impossible to forget. In libraries and museums today, their memory flickers gently like the flame of an oil lamp. Fragments of inscriptions carved into limestone. Jewelry shaped from amber and gold. Tiny glass vessels that once held perfume. A child's toy boat, its hull smooth from ancient hands. Each piece a whisper from the past, a reminder that their genius was not in conquest but in connection. They understood something the empires never did, that the world's greatest strength lies not in walls or weapons, but in exchange, in curiosity, in trust built across waters. The alphabet they spread becomes one of humanity's most enduring tools. With it, stories cross generations. Knowledge travels from scribe to scholar, from parchment to print, from the past to the present. Even the words you hear now, carried by invisible currents through the air, find their ancestry in the letters the Phoenicians once carved into clay. Every written thought, every recorded song, every whisper of learning owes something to those early traders who, in the quiet of their workshops, sought a simpler way to mark meaning. When we think of civilization, we often think of monuments, pyramids, palaces, temples of stone. But the Phoenicians left behind no grand monuments. Their temples have eroded, their cities lie buried under centuries of earth. What remains is the invisible architecture of human connection. The trade routes, the scripts, the shared customs, and the deep knowledge of the sea. Their empire was an empire of motion, of tide and trust. It was never meant to be still. Imagine standing now on the shore of ancient Byblos, where it all began. The air is cool. The scent of cedar drifts down from the mountains. Waves touch the stones softly as they have for millennia. You can almost hear the creak of ropes, the murmur of sailors preparing for voyage, the low hum of prayers offered to the gods of wind and water. The horizon glows faintly with first light. Somewhere out there, beyond sight, a ship begins to move. Its sail catches the morning breeze and slowly, it glides toward the open sea. That ship is the symbol of everything the Phoenicians were: daring, adaptive, and always in motion. They taught the ancient world to see the sea not as a barrier but as a bridge. Through them, Egypt learned of distant metals, Greece of Eastern dyes, Mesopotamia of foreign glass. Through them, languages mingled, beliefs intertwined, and the first hints of a global world began to form. They connected lands long before the age of maps, guided only by the stars, the winds, and the memory of routes carved in water. And now, as centuries fold upon centuries, their memory becomes part of the deeper story, the story of how humanity learned to move, to trade, to communicate. The Sea Kings are gone, yet their legacy moves within every harbor and every ship that sails. The Mediterranean, that inland sea they once ruled, still carries their echo. Fishermen cast their nets where their galleys once passed. Sailors whisper old words, never knowing they belong to a language older than empire. The rhythm of oars, the shape of harbors, even the structure of alphabets, all bear the imprint of the Phoenicians. In the quiet of night, when the sea is calm and the stars shimmer above, it is easy to imagine them still there. Their ships, faint as memories, glide silently beneath the moon. Their sails shimmer like silver ghosts. The helmsman watches the constellations as he always did, guiding his vessel by the eternal lights. Each star becomes a landmark, each wave a word in the story of their world. They do not speak, but the ocean carries their language still, a language of movement, courage, and curiosity. And perhaps that is the greatest gift they left us, the understanding that the horizon is never the end. It is always a beginning, always an invitation to explore further, to connect more deeply, to learn from what lies beyond. Their story reminds us that even the smallest shore can touch the whole world if its people choose to look outward, not inward. Now, as this journey draws to a close, let your thoughts drift with the tide. Picture the Phoenician ships, their purple sails glowing softly against the stars. Hear the whisper of the wind across the deck, the gentle slap of waves against the hull. The crew sleeps below, wrapped in linen, dreaming of distant lands. The sea cradles them like a mother, rocking them slowly toward morning. The waves murmur their names, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Carthage, and the sound becomes a lullaby. The waters that once carried their ambitions now carry their memory, endlessly repeating it in the rhythm of the tide. They have returned to the element they loved most, the one that always welcomed them home. So rest now as they rest. The story is complete. The sails are furled, the stars steady. The long voyage of the Phoenician Sea Kings has reached its quiet harbor. The sea holds them gently, and through its eternal song, their legacy whispers on, calm, unbroken, and endless. The sea is timeless. Long after the empires of men have faded into dust, the ocean continues its endless song. The Phoenicians, those patient masters of tide and timber, have long departed from the stage of history, yet the ocean still remembers the rhythm of their oars. It carries within its depths the pulse of their voyages, the shimmer of their purple dye, and the faint echo of their prayers whispered to the winds. The waves themselves seemed to hum with memory, retelling their story to the shores that once bore their ships. In the centuries after Carthage's fall, the world that the Phoenicians once connected begins to shift. New powers rise: Rome, Byzantium, the caliphates of the East. Yet even as the names change, the old routes remain. Traders still follow the same coastlines the Phoenicians once knew by heart. The same harbors that once echoed with Phoenician tongues now resound with Latin, Greek, and Arabic, yet beneath every language the same longing remains, the longing to reach across the waters, to find what lies beyond the horizon. On quiet nights along the coasts of Lebanon, fishermen still light their lamps before setting sail. The glow reflects softly on the waves, much like the torches of the ancient mariners. In the distance, the lights of Tyre flicker faintly, layered upon layers of ruins. Beneath the modern city lie the stones of the old harbor, half-sunken but steadfast. The sea laps gently at the ancient walls as if in recognition. Every tide that rises and falls there carries whispers from 3,000 years ago, the cries of dockworkers, the chants of sailors, the creak of cedar hulls sliding into the water. The Phoenicians are gone, yet they are not lost. Their story remains imprinted on the earth and the sea alike. Scholars and archaeologists walk these coasts with quiet reverence. They dig through sand and time, uncovering pieces of pottery, fragments of glass, traces of writing. Each discovery feels like a heartbeat, a momentary contact with the lives that once animated these shores. A clay tablet from Byblos, still bearing faint inscriptions in the early alphabet. A small amulet shaped like a ship, found in a burial mound overlooking the sea. Each object seems to whisper, "We were here, we sailed, we dreamed." And through these fragments the modern world begins to remember. There is a kind of peace in knowing that the Phoenicians never sought immortality through conquest. Their greatness was quieter, subtler. They did not carve their victories into stone, they carried them across the waves. Theirs was an empire of motion, and motion cannot be destroyed. Even when their cities burned, their influence flowed onward, absorbed into other cultures. The alphabet, the art of glassmaking, the knowledge of navigation. These are not trophies of empire but gifts freely shared. The sea itself became their monument, vast and indestructible. To imagine them now is to picture a world both familiar and ancient. A ship gliding silently across the starlit Mediterranean. The hull creaks softly as it moves, its sail glowing faintly under the moon. The air smells of salt and resin, of cedarwood freshly cut and polished. A helmsman stands at the stern, his eyes fixed upon the constellations. The North Star guides him as it guided all who came before. Around him the crew rests, their voices hushed. Some hum quiet songs, old hymns to the gods of the deep, to Yam, to Baal, to the spirits of the wind. They believe the sea is alive, listening, watching. And in a way perhaps it is. The Phoenicians knew the sea as both friend and challenge. It could grant wealth, but it could also take life without warning. They learned its moods, its currents, its silences. They read the color of the water to tell its depth. They watched the birds to predict storms. They could sense, in the faintest breeze, whether the gods were kind or restless. Their relationship with the sea was one of deep respect, born not of domination but of coexistence. They did not seek to conquer the waves, they sought to understand them. In their temples, offerings were made not to beg for victory, but for balance. The priests of Baal and Melkart burned incense of cedar and myrrh, believing the smoke would carry their prayers to the heavens. The mariners would stand in silence before departure, touching the sides of their ships as though greeting living beings. For them, each voyage was not merely commerce, it was a sacred act, a dialogue between man and the elements. Each journey affirmed their faith in the order of the cosmos, in the harmony between earth, sea, and sky.